morning. I'm Mary McClyman. I work at Heritage Behavioral Health Center in Decatur, Illinois. And I also have with me today Steve LaFleur.
And Ashley.
And Ashley. Well, I was going to do that.
Okay.
Steve and I may kind of. And Ashley Gore has joined us as well. We asked her kind of at the last minute, but we definitely want her perspective on the 270, 271 from the RCM perspective in regards to the importance of that. And so she has agreed to join us at the last minute. Steve worked for Heritage many, many years ago. So those of you who have been with ECHO for a long time have probably seen me and Steve together before in a presentation or two. My very first presentation at Peer-to-Peer was 14 years ago, and I was terrified. I'm a little nervous today, but I was terrified that day.
This is as far away as she's let me sit from her.
But Steve definitely got me through that first presentation. So now he is back doing some work with Heritage. He kind of, I think, semi-retired to get closer to the grandchildren about a year ago, and he is doing some work with Heritage again, and we are happy to have him. He's doing, at first it was going to be kind of the IT stuff, but he's become more of what we're calling a strategic partner with Heritage. He knows our business, he knows our staff very well, and he definitely has been pushing us to do new things, and we're expanding some and opening some new offices, and he's been actively involved in that expansion. So that is his role with Heritage. Do you want to add anything else to that?
Nope.
All right. So Heritage is, we've been in business for 60 years. We just celebrated our 60th anniversary. We had a little celebration last weekend. We have 200 staff, an annual budget of over $10 million. Last year we served 5,777 clients to be exact. So really our presentation today is on the 270 and 271. I'm curious, is there anyone or any of you using the 270, 271 currently? Of course. You're using it? Okay.
Just implemented?
So we saw a presentation at Peer-to-Peer a number of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I went home and I just said, oh, we've got to do this. We've got to get this set up. And I did. I installed it. I submitted a file to the state, and it rejected. I did it again, and it rejected. And finally, I was just like, I'll forget it. So I gave up on it because there was something else to be done. I didn't have time to mess with it. Well, since Medicaid expansion, we were around 60% Medicaid prior to expansion, and now we're about 87% Medicaid. Prior to the expansion, we submitted our Medicaid claims to one place. And so it didn't really matter. You know, everybody who was Medicaid was submitted here, and if they weren't, we had grants that paid for the rest of the services. Well, with expansion, what we have been really, really good at Heritage is applying for Medicaid for clients. We help them get Medicaid, which is great. Now we have 87% of our clients have Medicaid, and we're really proud of that. We've done a great job with that. However, we also entered managed care hell with Medicaid expansion. And I can't begin to, Ashley may speak to this a little bit. I have to say the connection with Ashley is on July 1st of this year, we began using ECHO's RCM service. So they know all of our dirty laundry right now and all of our secrets and the stuff we're really, really bad at. They're seeing it, which was...
But we're really good at doing laundry.
They are. They've been great at cleaning up our mess. But prior to that, we realized our rejection rates were significant due to eligibility. We were getting huge rejections for clients we weren't reporting to the right Medicaid. So we would send our claims to Molina. Oh no, they don't have Molina anymore. They moved to Health Alliance. Oh no, they're not with the state Medicaid anymore. They now have Molina. In Illinois, they can change every month. So every single month they can switch between these. So it became impossible to manage. And we were trying to look these clients up individually. Well, we do a lot of outpatient services. Our clients don't all come in the building. They don't all check in at a desk every month. So we can't say, has your Medicaid changed? And if we do, guess what they tell us? No. No, it's still the same.
Oh, they heard that answer.
Because as far as they're concerned, it is the same. So you can't go by what they're saying. So we would look it up. We have a system in Illinois in which we can look it up and verify which one they have, one at a time, and it took forever. The resources we were committing to that were just, we didn't have them. We couldn't afford to do it. So we were either going to lose money or we were going to increase our expenses by hiring more staff. So how are we going to do this? So Steve began to help us explore the 270, 271 option again. And in, I believe it was March, we started the process. So this is just, I already spoke to that. And so some of our problems, we were having substantial denials for patients ineligible on the date of service. So they weren't eligible for whichever Medicaid we sent it to. It wasn't that they didn't have Medicaid. They weren't eligible with that managed care company. We didn't have enough staff to verify them one at a time. And then we were seeing a substantial decrease in revenue because of eligibility. The only way we were going to be able to manage this was by some sort of batch eligibility check, and that's where the 270, 271 come in. For those of you who aren't familiar with the 270 or 271, it's very similar to the 837 and 835. It's a file that you create, you submit it, and you get a file back that tells you whether your clients are eligible or not. Seems easy. You create a file, you submit it to the state sends you something back, says yes or no. Well, not so much. So we set up our configuration screens, we submitted a file, and it rejected. We made the changes they suggested, we submitted the file, and it rejected many times. And so Steve began to work one-on-one with the state on our behalf to get that kind of work out those kinks, which it's kind of like working a rejection, a denial. You have to talk to them and say, why isn't this accepting the file? And they'd say, do this. So it's a matter of working through with your state what they're looking for in their system. So it was an order of how they wanted to see certain things. The results of our first accepted file we received were shocking. We had over 100. We have about 1,500 registered clients at any given time. So 87% of those have Medicaid, and 150 of ours that were actively engaged in treatment were enrolled in the wrong Medicaid. So you can imagine what that will do to your bottom line. Unacceptable, embarrassing. To have to tell your CFO, you've got 150 of your clients enrolled to the wrong Medicaid, that we wouldn't have been paid for those if we didn't get it right, was significant. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to we thought it would be helpful. It's my understanding there's quite a few new customers now that haven't done a whole lot in Revenue Manager. And for those who've never set up the 270 and all, just to kind of walk through the process, what that looks like with you. And then hopefully you'll have, when you can go back to your offices, you can download this and have a tool to use when you get back to implement this in your own offices. So the first thing you have to do is set up your configuration screens. It's much like setting up the 837 configurations. It's the same idea. So you've got to get the right numbers in there and what your state's kind of looking for and go through that process. That's what's going to get your file back and whether it's going to be accepted or not accepted. So once you get all that set up for the first time, well, you got to install it first. Echo kind of helped us get all of that set up initially. And then you're going to,
That's my part.
Oh, I'm already to Steve's part. So let me just back up a little bit. One of the things that we wanted to do is, so we have 1,500 clients. We don't want to just check the clients that have Medicaid. We want to check all 1,500 clients for eligibility, because what we're doing at Heritage is we're applying for Medicaid for many clients. So when they walk in the door, they don't have Medicaid. So we wanted to have the ability to check everybody who had self-pay set up against through this on the Medicaid website to see if they were eligible or not, because many of them would have become eligible at some point. So one of the there's a couple challenges with that. So Steve helped us to kind of.
We'll talk about those.
You want to talk about that? Okay. One of the things we did have to do was it looks for, in the path, it'll look for a policy number. Do you speak to that in yours?
Nope.
So in self-pay, in Revenue Manager, there's not a place for policy number. In Illinois, we use what we call recipient ID numbers, and we collect that in Clinician's Desktop. Every Medicaid patient in Illinois has a recipient or a RIN number, and so we have that sent over to Revenue Manager and put into the policy number field that's grayed out in Revenue Manager, so that that number will be submitted with the file to the state to check that RIN. Everybody gets a RIN, even if they don't have Medicaid in Illinois, because we have some minimal, but some grant dollars left. So they have to, that's the number they use to pay for those grant dollars. So,
Want to have Ashley talk about eligibility?
You want to speak a little bit to, from the RCM's perspective, the importance of it and the difference it's made with your agencies?
Yeah, so eligibility is the largest denial that we've seen with the agencies that we work with in RCM. So I don't know if that's something that you guys see across the board, that eligibility is a real problem. But I know with regards to Medicaid, there are so many different plans, and they jump from plan to plan every month. A lot of the patients are homeless. They might not be getting their cards in the mail, and Medicaid is switching them to different plans, and they don't even know it. So as Mary said, when they come in, they have no idea what their policy is. They just know that they have Medicaid. And so that's our biggest problem, is that we have a lot of agencies where the wrong MCO is the priority payer in Revenue Manager, and it's incorrect. And we've had a lot of agencies have lost a lot of money because that wasn't correct. And once it hits timely, there's no going back. That money is completely lost unless you have a really good relationship with the state and can provide them with that information and get reimbursed for that somehow. But most times I'd say it gets lost, and that's the biggest problem that we see. And utilizing the 270, 271 really minimizes that struggle. Not just the money lost, but the time spent on working denials and open AR that's still open or denied because of eligibility. Whereas on the front end, if it's run and caught up front before the charge even goes out the door, that saves a lot of time and increases a lot of your cash flow. The way we work with Heritage is the services don't even get processed until eligibility has been run and verified and updated. So there's a very low chance of those services denying for eligibility. So I think it's fantastic and very important, probably one of the more important processes that should be followed to ensure that you're maximizing your cash flow.
Thank you. I think, I didn't speak to our workflow process. So we process, ECHO processes our claims now once a week for the week prior. And prior to that, we run the 270 and 271 before we process those claims every week. So that's kind of our workflow. Every week we're running a 270, 271 for the week before. So it's just a constant thing. Because some of our clients, while they tip, I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but usually they'll have, Molina for the month, and it'll start at the beginning of the month. But there is an occasion where they'll start August 15th, their Medicaid starts. So we run it every week, which has really, really made a significant difference. You want to go ahead and talk about?
Yeah. There may have been a day when eligibility was not as important as it is nowadays, as Mary suggested, back when we were getting grants, and there was one state Medicaid, we didn't need to have maybe a batch insert to be able to keep up with it. But nowadays, with funders being stricter on what they're paying and trying to find every way possible not to pay us, you know, we have to keep up with what's going on with the state system. Lo and behold, with Heritage, I've been working with the 270, 271 now probably 3 or 4 years, and it was 3 or 4 years ago I discovered, golly, Echo's had this 270, 271 for probably 10 years maybe or more. It's been out there, but didn't really know what it did, you know, how it was functioning. And then a couple of years ago when we were working with it in Oklahoma, found out that the state had this option where we could submit the file, and oh, lo and behold, Echo had this functionality in there. Well, let's go ahead and send it. So a couple of things I want to show you with the 270, 271. There are some options available. They may not be fully Echo approved right now, but there are different ways to kind of work with it because the function that's in the system basically is set up by itself right now. The default procedure is when you run it, it's going to look at, and we found this out at Heritage, it's going to look at, they run it for a week at a time. It looks at every service that a client has, and it submits those services. So if they had 3 services for that week, those 3 services get submitted to the state. And then what the state did in return was the state sent back eligibility for all 3 of those services. So basically there was triple eligibility in the system. And literally the first week, I think we had hundreds of thousands of rows created in the table that Mary had to filter through, and it was like, what am I going to do with this? And she'll look at that later. But I found some ways over the years to manipulate the path a little bit so you can somehow sort out the quantity of data you're getting or with your workflow. The first option, and I tried to point you at least in the direction where you can go to do this, but the first option was in Oklahoma, where they wanted to check, as Mary suggested, they wanted to check eligibility on every client, and they did it every month when they started. And there really wasn't a way with the default functionality to do that, but there is a way to go in behind the scenes and just create the query, manipulate the query so that it basically looked for all open clients that had self-pay. Every client had a self-pay pay source. That's set up almost for every client in every agency. So you had your pay source. We just had to find a way. I only want to select my open clients. I don't want the activities, 3 or 4 activities. I just want one eligibility per one client every month. And when I get it back, I can compare my list and see who lost it, who got it, who's new, and I can make my changes. That's what they decided to do. So basically, go ahead, Mary. You're on the path in Revenue Manager, and go ahead and click. And when you go to this second tab, Selected Path, and I usually I don't go right to it. I kind of go about this far down. Isn't that very technical? That far down, and you find Create Query. That's where the query is getting created. Go ahead and click. And we're creating a new query, and we're opening that up. That's the selected step. Now I'll go ahead and click again. Now when I open it up, here's the where statement, and Echo calls it the big where. And the default behind the system for the big where is you're going to select every service for that pay source that a client had, and you're going to submit that to the state. What this can do is you can manipulate this where statement, and all we did in Oklahoma was where admit stat is open. So 1,500 clients, 3,000 clients, all self-pay, one time to the state, once a month or once a week, however frequently you want to do that. And basically, when you put the date in, there's one other adjustment to make here where you're putting the date in. It's basically on the date that you submit it, you put the date in, and it's going to submit it for that date to the state. Creates the file, upload the file, state sends back one eligibility. And then once we got that eligibility back behind the scenes, then there was, you know, you're in the table with Crystal and you're doing your sorting however you want. Jason, question?
So the default way you said it was send out on the 270 the number of rows based on the number of appointments that person has, right?
They send one, the 270 would generate an eligibility file for each service, the same eligibility file for each service.
It's one a day. It creates a line
One
for
a day.
one a day.
Okay.
So
One a day, or is it like one per appointment?
I believe it's one a day per, so each client gets a row if they have a service on that date. So if they had, if they were seen all 7 days, it'd
They'd
be
have
seven.
seven.
So
Yeah.
that's what makes the 271. So
Yes,
they can
yes.
row to bring back in.
Yes, oh, because
270 rows.
hundreds of thousands of rows. Mary ran into that. It's like, how can we, well, we'll show you option 2.
Well, and the other issue is, so the reason it comes back that large for Illinois is for every service that Medicaid pays for, so all their medical and everything, it says, oh, Medicaid will pay for this, they'll pay for this, they're eligible for this, they're eligible for this. So it creates a row for every service that Medicaid says they're eligible for. It doesn't just say, yes, they're eligible on this date of service.
So one of the ways that we tried to limit that was this, to just said one row per one client, and that limited a little bit what the state sent. And then the other option, so that's one pay source, open client, so it's one row per client. The next option, I think, is option 2, just above here. Go there, click it in, you're manipulating. It took a while to find where we could manipulate this, so open that up. Here, I was able to filter out because it wasn't taking, the default wasn't taking just billable services. Mary was finding that if that client had an entry in active work on that during that date range, it didn't matter if it was a kept client or not. It was generating a row. So what we did here was we were able to limit the recipient area to not look at anything that was, only look at those billable services. Don't generate a row for me. So that probably cut it by 40%, the amount that we were getting back from the
So
state.
you adjust that based off the where statement looking at the service itself, or
Yeah.
parts of the PAR combination, or just found.
Basically, this is just looking at recipient codes that we didn't want it to deal with. So anybody that had, and there were a lot of those. Now the only problem with this one, and this is one of my office hours tasks this year, I wanted to add another part into this query to also look at programs that we wanted to filter out, but this path and what I could limit was limited in characters, so I could only fit so much in there. It's like, why did you do that? But it was at least an option to be able to filter it and cut it by 40%.
And
So-
it did significantly. I
Yeah.
mean, I would have loved to been on the foundation ID and said anything that's billable
Yep.
based on foundation ID. That would have been the perfect world. But this was a nice alternative, and
Right.
I think the way the 270 is intended to work is you're doing it before a client's seen. So that's why it's set up that way. You don't know if they're going to fail. You don't know if they're going to cancel
Right.
if you're doing it ahead of time. We're not using it that way. We're using it the week after. So that's a little different way of looking at it. Scott?
Yeah, Mary, it was also intended to be, initially it was intended to be used for type 30 eligibility requests. In many states, the funder is only going to return an answer yes or no to the question, is this client eligible for this service on this date? So what you've done expands it beyond what the capabilities of a lot of Medicaid funders is.
Yeah, but what the states are sending back way more than yes or no,
But
it
different
seems like.
states are sending back different stuff.
Right.
Okay.
North Carolina doesn't send back as much as you're talking about, but when I was reading about it, they have the ability to do that.
Okay. I'm just now researching the state of Michigan and working there, and it took me 3 phone calls to Michigan.gov just to find somebody that actually knew something about it and could actually answer the question, say, Yes, because I've made the assumption that most states, when you do your research, most states have this option available. Now, Michigan's fairly new to the process from what they told me, but they now have that option available and the functionality's there. So the only reason I'm here today with Mary is to let you know that there's some options based upon your workflow if you set up the 270, which it seems like a really good thing for us as customers trying to work with the insurers to have this information. Just to let you know, there are some options to be able to limit based upon and set it up based upon your workflow and how you want to do it. So, thanks, Mayor.
I think, you know, the big thing is don't get discouraged when you start the process. Have a person committed to get it set up and going and contacting your, you know, whomever you've got to contact with the state, and stick with it, you know, and pick that person who's going to stick with it. I wasn't that person. Steve was. But, and I appreciate the work he did, because it was, I mean, it's not that the functionality wasn't there. We had it. We could use it, like Steve said, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it takes the footwork in your organization to make it work. It's not that it's not there. You've just got to take the time to do it.
So what are your next steps? Like, as you bring in the 271, how do you then integrate it into your workflow so that you can adjust the MCOs that person has, or cancel out the insurance altogether?
So my workflow now so I'm going to go through that here on this. Yeah, that's part of it. So
Good transition, Jason.
So I'm not going to spend much time on these screens. You'll have copies of these so you can kind of see how, some of this for some of you is going to be very elementary. It's going to be like, yeah, I know. But for those of you who may not have ever used it, I think it'll be helpful as you walk through the process. It's pretty intuitive in regards to how to complete the screens. It's much like to anything else that you would complete in the Echo's product. But it's, so you just put in the activity date, submit, it creates the file, you run it, and then it creates an out file that you submit to the state. Those are the, it creates 5 files. The out file, we turn it into a text file, we submit it to the state, and then we get back the 999 acknowledgement file saying, yeah, we got it, it's good. And then we usually get that back in a couple minutes, you know, and it says, yeah, the file went through. It takes about a day to get it back in Illinois, to get the whole file back. It's usually the next morning we can go on the state's website and we can get the file back. And then we read all of our files through Notepad++ is what we use. I don't know if, you know, others use other things, but this is just, if you don't use it and you choose to, this is how we put it in the format so we can read it. And this is just, we always want to see an A, you know. R's are bad. So I just look for an A and I smile.
That's universal.
And if she sees an R, she doesn't.
Right. R, yeah. We've only had one R with the acknowledgement, except for when we first started. And we never could figure out really. Echo worked with us for about a week going back and forth on it, and then just suddenly accepted. I can't. So I feel like it was something on the state's end probably, and they didn't want to accept responsibility. So it comes back, we import it. So initially we look at what we do, so we import the file, and this is what Steve was talking about, and I've kind of, so we have some non-billable services. You can see where the last name is jail here. That's not really somebody's last name, or court, or on-call services. So that's where you get the non-billable stuff that goes through too when you use self-pay and you select everything. Those we just delete when they come back through. So we just pull all of our rejected. I query by rejected, and I pull out, I'm familiar with who's not really a client. I know jail liaison is not a client. We will never have a client probably named jail liaison. So we just delete all of those. So then before we run the report, we get rid of all of those. The next piece was creating the crystal report. We created a crystal report. These are the tables that we, and the linking for them if you need, you know, if you want to use that in order to link. I know that's always helpful for me when I'm writing a crystal report to know easily, well, what do we link together? So what we did, I didn't show for some reason I didn't put a screenshot of the Crystal report in here. I don't know how I missed that. But anyway, the intent was really, we get it in Crystal. There's many sub-reports in this because we each, so Molina comes back and it says they're Molina eligible or they're Health Alliance eligible. So I have a sub-report for each managed care for the state. And then that way it creates a field for each one that I then can export into Excel. So then what I do is I use Revenue Manager's information. So in Revenue Manager, so on the second row, that client had Health Alliance, HA is Health Alliance, and Medi, who is our state, who we send it to in the state, also says they have Health Alliance. So when I sort it by Health Alliance, Health Alliance. If they match, I delete those rows, I'm done. So I just kind of start narrowing it down when I run through Excel by sorting. And I sort what's good. And then what's left when I'm done are the problems. That, the first couple times I did it, it took me a while to get the report, well, it took me probably a week or two to get the report to look just how I wanted it to. But now I can, the longest part of the 270, 271 is the importing it back in, uploading it from the state when it comes back. It takes about 4 to 6 hours probably for that to get uploaded when we bring it back in, the files back in. I can export it. I can run the Crystal report in a couple minutes. It exports into Excel, probably 5 minutes or less. It's a big file, so it takes a little bit of time to export it. This is what it kind of, so this just gives you a sense. If you don't use Excel much or your staff don't use Excel much, I like to color code, so I have color codes, so everything kind of sorts together. So all my purples, I sort by color. So I sort everything, and if they're both purple, I delete that row. So these are good. These look good. So that's just a quick how we go about it. We use Excel to sort through it quickly. We find the good ones, we leave the bad ones, and then we work the bad ones. It takes me about 15 minutes now to then go in and fix the pay sources that are left. So I've got maybe 50, I may come up with 15 to 20 problems. It may take me 15 to 20 minutes to go in and fix the pay sources now. Before 1,500 clients and you're running them all individually, you've got to do all that first. Then you got to go fix all of the pay sources. So it's very, it doesn't take hardly any time anymore. From an administrative standpoint, it's minimal now compared to what it was. So each week after we do it, we go in and delete the tables and clear out all of that stuff that was in there. This is just the script that we use. Steve helped us with this, and we clear all of that out on a weekly basis before we run the new ones. I just thought I'd share that in case any of you wanted to use that. And we'll go with questions now.
Yeah, I think Jason, ideally what I'd like to see, and it's dreaming a little bit, but ideally it would be great. Now it takes Mary, when she gets that report done and all the color coding. In Oklahoma, the Crystal report was real down and dirty. All we did they had 3 different reports. I didn't even put labels on them, and they worked with them. It's like, these are the ones that got it, these are the ones that lost it, and it was real basic, and it was easy for them to go in. And again, once they had that report, they just assigned it to somebody, and however long it took to change that stuff. Ideally, I'd love to be able to look in that 271 eligibility and have some type of insert, to say, hey, I don't want to have to assign this to somebody. Just go through and with a stored procedure or something and just create that pay source, get rid of the one that's not active. That's a little bit farther down the road, but by the time she gets done with her report and does a color coding, 15 minutes, she's been able to live with that, so they haven't pressed. And other things are going on now, so.
Mary, you were saying your workflow was you would do this for 7 days, right? So you run it for a 7-day period, and once you finish it, then you'll process that 7 days.
Right. Once we have, exactly. So we run the 270 first, then get the 271 back, and then I give, since the RCM's doing it now, once I've done that, our schedule right now is Thursdays typically. We usually contact the RCM on Thursday and say, we're all good. We've run the 270, 271. Now, Echo's going to start doing the 270, 271 for us as part of the RCM service that they're doing for us. So we're going to be working with them this week on turning that over. But we'll still probably maintain the pay sources. I have a little bit of some control issues right now with pay sources still. And that's because we've got a lot of what Steve described as doing an insert or something. That sounds great, but there's a lot of rules that go with that, and it makes me a little nervous because it's not just a matter of, oh, go in Health Alliance and set up Molina. It's not always that simple. So sometimes there's, like for Health Alliance or Molina, they also do the Medicare. If the client has Medicare, that managed care company also manages their Medicare. So that you have to end our regular Medicare, set up the managed care Medicare. So it's all those rules that come with it that make me a little anxious about just setting up an insert.
It's more work than the payoff right now,
Right.
for sure.
That's the thing, probably as far as I wanted to
Yeah.
be, it's just all the Excel validations that you did, I'd want to automate that. And so the only report that you got was
The
what
good,
you
yeah, the
did.
stuff you got to change.
That'd be, yeah, that would be, right. So, I mean, it's been wonderful. I can't even begin to describe how much easier it's made our lives. Other questions?
Can the 270, 271 be used for anything other than Medicaid?
And it could be used for any pay source.
As long as they.
Oh, they accept it,
ability and
right.
accept it.
I'm sorry, right. A lot of, I think, the commercial insurances, can you,
Some, not all of
The
them,
big
but
ones?
you can on some of them, yeah.
So you two worked closely together to make this happen for your system. Is it recommended that we hire an additional IT person to help with this process?
no, I think it's, what you
Once you-
need is somebody who has the patience to work with the state and get that file accepted. It's not, once it's done, there's not a lot of work
Right.
involved. I mean, it's really, the hard work, I mean, I spent a number of hours you're gonna have to get, I can't just give you my crystal report because it's gonna come back different from your state, the way the information's gonna come back. Otherwise, I'd be happy to share that with you so you didn't have that work involved on your end. I think contacting some of the other agencies that may have done it would be helpful just for some advice and all, but no, I don't think you need to hire. We just happen to have Steve on staff doing other things for us, and he's very good at, it's having that person who can work with the state people and understand the language. I mean, if you got an IT person who can kind of understand the language, I think you'll be.
Your crystal report will be predicated upon what the state sends back to you in that 271. Whoever does crystal at your agency will be able to look at that table and sort it however you may want to see it.
And I think that's why
So-
Echo hasn't provided a crystal report because it comes
Yeah,
back
'cause
different.
the data comes
for
back.
every state.
Yeah.
So, other questions?
I have another question.
That's fine.
So when you have the clients that have VR, that aren't eligible, is there an alert that happens in Echo so that like clinicians are aware that is the case?
Well, we use our therapists and all use the VHR, so we have our pay sources that show up on the VHR, so they can tell when they go in that they no longer have Medicaid when they check in. So do they get notified every time? No, we don't have a process in place for that, but you certainly could set up a process where that happens.
They have to make the change when when they get that data back. I mean, they go in and Mary takes that 15 minutes, changes it so everybody's pay source is accurate, and then it's going to reflect on the VHR for the
For
the
us,
staff.
it depends on who the client is. If they're a case management client and they're getting a lot of services, I'm going to contact the case manager and say, hey, you're typically in Illinois, having 87% of our clients with Medicaid, it's not usually they're losing their Medicaid, it's that they're switching into a different managed care company. We do have clients that lose them because they didn't fill out the paperwork when it was time to recertify or something like that. In that case, I'm going to notify the case manager and say, hey, your client lost their Medicaid. You need to take care of this. So, but as far as an automated process, we don't currently have something automated set up, but that's certainly something you could do.
You said you're sending just one file to Medi, and Medi inside that file is coming back, it's telling you which MCO is going.
Yes. Yes.
I think the biggest, go ahead.
I'm currently working on trying to get the 271 to work. I'm having a lot of problems. I've been working on it since June. Am I correct when I say that it works with the scheduler but not the activity log?
Right.
Yeah, I think
I
it's
think so.
pulling, is the state rejecting your file?
The state's rejecting my file. I'm getting things in it that say I'm in preview mode. I don't know where that's coming from. I can't.
Oh, when you run it, there's a
So-
piece that you went through it real fast, and you have to change it from
I
preview
did
to
change
submit.
it and it still comes up. preview.
Well, on your configuration,
Still coming up preview mode.
it's a, yeah.
I have two problems coming back from the state. That's one of them, and I can't get it to take preview mode off.
I think there's a configuration that is set to preview.
Right there.
or
Production.
I have it on production.
Hmm.
So there's
Showing up
another
preview.
one when you actually run it, it comes up just like an 837 when you can, right there. You have to change that, it's
Yep,
default as
I
an
have.
E, you gotta change that to an S each time you run it.
I'm 99% sure I'm putting an S there.
Okay.
Hmm.
Because that's the one, if you, we were having an issue when we were first running, they weren't changing it to an S.
No,
So
I know
when
I
the
am.
271 came in, it would never work right, because it didn't see that the 270 was created.
No, I know I am because I run the 837s as well, so I would know to put an S there.
Okay.
Hmm.
But anyway, so it does not pull for the activity log, is that correct?
Well, it's all the same.
I mean, it's pulling from active work, so
But
that,
it's, I seem to recall there's something in the big where, that is looking for services that are not yet tagged. Is that the case? Or
Mm-mm.
are all your services
All of
tagged
ours are.
before you run this?
It's, some are, some aren't.
And you're getting.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you do have to have an open activity though, like a non-closed out activity that's still in active work under that client. So the activity log should have that in active work.
And you can actually see, you can actually, if you look at the screens, you can see in some of those filters in there, like the big, the big where. When you go and find what that big where actually is and you see what it is, you can see the active work stuff that it's pulling and what it's trying to do. So just have to take a look at it. But yeah, it's a challenge to get the state, to work through it, but it's definitely worth it on the backside. So, what state?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
You said you could set it up per client though, not necessarily by the activity? You can just look at the client?
Yeah, that's what Oklahoma decided to do, was just look at just open clients, and the pay source they selected was self-pay because everyone had a self-pay. So it would pull their 3,000 clients however often they wanted to check it. And it
That
would
didn't
just-
work for us because we
Right.
didn't necessarily have them registered yet. They may have gotten a crisis service and hadn't become what we considered open yet. So we couldn't just go by admit status equals
Right.
R, because we could still have somebody that's closed or something, and they had on Saturday a crisis service was provided. Well, I'm running the 270 on Tuesday morning for everything through that Saturday, and they may not have come in for their assessment and been actually registered at that point. So that's why we chose not, but that's a workflow. I mean, that's really based
Yep.
on how you do business in your organization. So
Yep.
we don't register everyone until they come in for their assessment.
If you have questions about the particulars of this stuff, just our contact stuff is at the end, so just send an email or call.
In Oregon, the clients flip back and forth. They might have Medicaid for one day and then they go back to Oregon Health Plan and then back. It's horrible.
Yeah, so you might have to do the option too, where you have to check whatever their eligibility was for that week, for that week of service that the client had an activity. So you might have to do what Heritage is having to do.
When changing the pay source, doesn't that require you to reprocess, back it out? And like in our case, we have maybe commercial insurance and we have to do water call?
No, because we're running it before we process.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So that's why, and that's why our workflow is that designed that way. That's why we want to do it that way. So we don't want the services processed until we make sure the right pay source, because you're absolutely right. That was our problem before.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare if you don't do it, you know, if you don't get the pay sources set up the right way before you process, then we all know how difficult reprocessing can be. Other questions?
I just wanted to add that if it's something that you are interested in, you can contact support at Echo and they can install that for you. And then if you do need assistance with kind of having an explanation, having some training on how to use it, things like that, just let them know, and either your account manager or support, and they'd be happy to walk you through what they can. And I know every scenario is going to be different, but it's information that we can get from other agencies in your state too, who are currently using it.
Yeah, Jock was very, very helpful for us during that whole implement, while we got it up and going. He really did help us get it to a point that we were able to get a good file out. You know, Steve did the footwork with dealing with the state that I didn't want to do, but Echo really helped us get it up and going. So, all right, I think if there's no more questions, thank you for listening in, and I hope that you all will, if you're not using it, that you do and see great results. Don't hesitate to contact either Steve or I, and certainly Echo support if you have questions in regards to installation and all of that. They were extremely helpful. Thank you.